This video is going to finish with the bedposts, right? This one should be reasonably short, right? A little bit shorter than the last video. Because really we just want to finish the bedpost and mirror it over, right? Like I said, we got some more videos we're going to make for later in the week to kind of finish the bed with the metal railing and the blankets. We'll talk about cleaning up the outliner, deleting history, things like that. Now, really, we've seen that this was just cubes, and we're using move and scale and stuff like that to shape it. And we're using some bevels, and we're going to see some more bevels here, right? We're going to see bevels plenty this semester, right? But we want to get this ball on top here, right? So that leaves me in a position where I really want to have a hole on the top here. But it does need to be a little bit smaller, right? You can kind of see how this kind of comes in a little bit and then turns into this ball, right? And we also see we kind of want a bit of roundness on these corners here. So there's kind of that light being caught there. So there should be a bevel on that, right? So what I'm going to do is I want to make a slightly smaller top to this that's a hole, that's open. And that's going to allow us to make the ball later on, right? And by later on, I mean a couple minutes from now. So the first thing I'm going to do is, remember, we have an object selected, right? Now, there's a quick key, and you'll see it's actually in view here, frame selection. Frame all is actually A, frame selection is F, right? So what's cool is when I hit F on my keyboard, you'll notice what it does is it zooms in, and it sets my camera rotate around the selected object. Isn't that cool? F is super useful. Standard feature. Just about all software is going to have this, right? At the end of the day, you could do all of this stuff in different software. 3D Studio Max, Blender, Modo, right? Just keep that in mind, right? So in this case, what I want to do is I want to select this top face. So remember, hold down right mouse button, right? When you hold down right mouse button, it brings up these menus. There's a lot more here and here, and we'll talk about some of this later on this semester. But for right now, we're going to stay here, right? These are our selection types, right? Remember, vertex space can do weird stuff like that. Just go back to object mode, you're fine, right? And you'll notice if you sometimes hold your mouse button over this one, you see how it kind of turns out on. So you have to kind of keep in mind that hold down right mouse button over the selection itself, or like fully off, and then you'll be kind of safer, right? But if you hold the right mouse button down with your cursors over this one, it'll kind of make that the active one, which is kind of cool, but kind of annoying a little bit. So remember, hold down right mouse button, and we can go to face selection. Because now we're selecting polygons, right? In this case, quads, right? You notice how we're working with quads. Quads are your friend. Now, we saw that F will frame selection on an object. What's cool about F, though, is now that I only have one face selected, if I hit F, F works on faces also. So frame selection, right? F for frame selection, frames any selection. It could be an edge loop, a couple of vertices, an object, several objects, a face, multiple faces. You hit F, and it zooms your camera in onto that selection, and it sets your camera rotate around that, right? Remember, Alt left mouse button for camera rotate, Alt middle mouse button for zoom, or Alt right mouse button for zoom, sorry, Alt middle mouse button for move camera, and F for frame selection. Pretty useful. Now in this case, like I said, I want this to be a little bit smaller, but if I just hit R for scale and scale it in, it makes the whole top taper in, right? Which for sometimes might be really cool. That's not what we want in this case, though. So we can't just scale it in. I need new geometry. Now that's one of the things we saw on our videos last week's end table, was the ability to create new geometry off of polygons, which is primarily our extrude tool. Now you'll notice there is a quick key for extrusion, right? Control E. There's actually even a quick key for multi-cut also. You'll see it more over here though. So if I hold down over here, Control Shift X. I'm not using it because that's actually my capture software. Snagit uses Control Shift X for capturing. So you'll see me just kind of click on the button down here, but that is the quick key, right? And extrude you'll see is Control E, right? So I'm going to extrude. Now it does bring up its own manipulator, and we saw the other day with thicken that if you want to thicken something, you grab that blue arrow. In this case though, it's going to be easier for me when I've extruded to just switch to R for regular scale. Now, that extrusion, the moment I clicked on that button, it extruded. So when you click extrude, you might have to undo a couple times for it to properly undo the extrusion, right? So don't do one undo, you might have to do two. Whenever you extrude, you should move it or scale it, right? Because you'll see how there is new geometry there. In this case, I wanted to scale it. So R for scale. Now, I want to scale it in uniformly, right? And there's a feature in the extrude called inset. We'll see it later on. But for right now, I just want you guys to still be used to kind of getting used to the manipulator tools. I don't want to just scale it this direction. or that direction, or just kind of eyeball it. So what I want to do is remember that very, very center one, right? If I left click drag on that light blue one, right? Once it's selected though, it's yellow. If I left click drag on that one, you see how it scales all of the axes in at the same time? And you see what it does is that extrusion, remember, keeps that face selected, but it allows you to move or scale or rotate. And once you do that, you'll see that there's other geometry kind of created to connect this face in its new position or size to the original faces. So it creates new geometry, right? In this case, an extrusion that we scale in a little bit kind of creates that little bit of a dip there for us. Now in this case, I don't want that polygon to be there though, right? So I can just hit delete, and that deletes that face. There's now a hole there. Now in this case though, I want to add that bevel, and that bevel is also going to give me more geometry here. That's going to allow this other new tool that I'm going to show you to work really cool on this kind of border edge loop here. So I need to bevel this. So I'm going to hold down right mouse button, right? So I can go back to my marquee, the marking menu selection type, right? I'm going to go back to edge. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to select all the edges. So I'm going to left click drag that box, right? And it doesn't matter if you're in your move, rotate, or scale tool still, right? It'll still do selections when you left click drag. If you want to be on the safe side, you can always hit Q to go back to your regular selection tool so there's no manipulator. So we're in edge mode, right? And we're selecting all the edges. We left click drag that box so all the edges are inside of it. Remember, that's what's on by default. And we'll eventually talk about drag, right? I just don't want to overwhelm you with too many things at one time. So as we go, I'll kind of show you more tools and more techniques and concepts. And what we want to do is we want to bevel again. At this point, you guys are starting to get used to bevel, right? Because we've already used it, and we're going to keep using it. So we bevel this, right? In this case, these bevels, when we look at the picture, they're a little bit bigger than this. So I'm going to say, go to fraction, maybe type in 0.7. Actually, you know, I think I'm going to go to full 1. Remember, these numbers are relative, though, right? So keep that in mind. If you haven't set to your scale, right, you're working and you're making a really small bed because you didn't set to meters, you didn't scale up everything to be meters. This fraction might be radically different, right? If I like set, you also notice how it doesn't max out at 1. I can type in like 20 if I wanted to. Now you notice it does that. My bevel overshot, right? It's actually gone past the border edge, right? So if I set this to say 5, see how it's still a little too big? Let's try 3. See how it's particularly at the top a little too big there? So let's try 2. 2 is getting us closer. I'm thinking maybe 1.6. And that's pretty close, but it's a little bit still too high on the top there. So I'm thinking maybe 1.4. You know what? I'm thinking 1.2. There we go. So you see how you can actually go above 1. In fact, usually you can go above the max slider by typing in a higher number. And you see you can go pretty high up to the point where it starts to overlap, right? So what happens is if I start to turn that up even higher to like 1.3, 1.5, see how it starts to kind of overlap, right? It starts to kind of flip. So you do have to be careful with that, right? I think 1.2 is actually pretty good for this. It'll be different on yours, so don't follow the exact number I'm putting in. Kind of adjust it until it looks the way you want it to. Now I do want some segments, so I'm going to add, say, 3 segments there. There we go. And now we've got a nice kind of subtle rounded corner about the size of that one. And we now actually have a lot more edges around this border edge loop. And that's going to come in handy in a minute here. So remember, fraction is the size of the bevel, and you can go above 1. Segments, of course, is how many edges are on there to round it off, so it rounds that corner. If you wanted to talk about depth, if I type this to say it'd be 0, so that'll kind of flatten and push those in a little bit. If you typed it to be, say, like 2, it pushes them out further, right? If you did, like, say, a -1, you see how it kind of inverses those, right? So that's what actual depth controls. By default, it's usually at 1, and that's usually what you're going to be fine. But like, say, -1 actually kind of inverses to push it in, and 0 kind of flattens it, right? So that's what depth does. Now, you're probably not going to need depth right now, but I figured, hey, we're talking about this, I might as well tell you what depth does. Usually when you're beveling, though, a lot of the time, most of the time, you're going to use fraction and segments. This other stuff has some other cool options. We'll talk about those a little more as we go along. Depth can kind of be pretty neat. Probably the 3 that I use the most are these top 3, particularly the top 2. Now in this case, I don't need to be in bevel tool anymore, so if you want, you can just hit Q, right? Remember, Q is your quick key for your selection tool, and it's a great way just to turn off whatever tool you're in. Now, what I want to do is I want to create that globe on the top there. But the nice thing is we've already got most of the post done, and we've got a nice rounded corner, and of course we've got that hole in the top there. Now, I'm still in edge mode, and I want to stay in edge mode. These are what we call border edges, right? This edge right here is not a border edge, right? This edge has two faces connected to it, right? If I was to extrude this non-border edge, it would create non-manifold geometry. And what that means is basically you have three faces, this face, and if I did extrude this just to show it, right, an extra face sticking out here, right? So what you have is you have three faces, right, connected to each other. Now what if I went to multi-cut? See how it stops there? It doesn't go through? What if I went to bevel in this area? It wouldn't bevel properly. Even if we hit 3 for smooth preview, it creates a weird shape. Non-manifold geometry is when you have three faces connected to a single edge. Non-manifold geometry generally sucks. Not terribly user-friendly. It causes a lot of problems. Generally, you don't want to be creating non-manifold geometry. I'm going to undo that. And point this out because really, in Maya, you should never extrude a edge that's not a border edge, right? Basically, the only thing you should ever extrude in Maya are faces or border edges. Now, you'll notice a border edge is an edge that's only got one face connected to it, right? Only one face. So if I was to extrude this out, it would really only create a normal edge, right? With two faces connected to it. So border edges, edges where there's no more geometry, where there's a hole, where that edge only has one face connected to it. Those are safe to extrude. In fact, you can build cars this way. We're going to actually build our clock radio that we're going to do as a later model this semester that way. Extruding border edges is actually a really powerful technique for doing more complicated hard surface modeling. But we'll see it later in this term. Well, actually, we're going to use it here today as well, but we're going to use it in a really simple fashion. So remember, if you double click on an edge, double left click, right? So double left click on an edge, it selects an edge loop, right? Once again, that's one of those things, if this mesh was triangulated, you couldn't do that, right? That's why we work with quads. But border edges are also edge loops. So if I double left click on a border edge, it selects that border edge loop. Yay. Save that, Control S. And what I want to do is I want to make this a circle shape. Now trying to shape that manually is not going to be fun. There is a tool in Maya, though, in Edit Mesh menu called Circularize. So in the Edit Mesh menu in Maya is Circularize, right? Modeling Toolkit's awesome. Some of your major tools are in there. You've got some pretty easy access to a lot of these features, which is great. But remember, these are all quick keys. You can get to them to other ways. And many tools are in Mesh, Edit Mesh, Mesh tools. So Edit Mesh has something called Circularize. And watch what it's going to do to this border edge loop. In this case, it's larger than it needs to be, but one of the things you'll notice is that we can left-click drag on the normal offset, right, to make it smaller. So normal offset does that. And we could actually left-click on twist to drag that, right? So there's twist as well. And actually, I didn't want radial offset. Let's see here. But these give you some options, right? Actually, radial offset's going to work better. You don't want to use normal offset, sorry. Radial offset is a better way to scale it. And then, of course, twist untwists it. So sometimes it'll be larger than it needs to be through radial offset, right? And sometimes twist will be a little off as well. You could technically do this just through rotate and scale also. But you'll notice what it did is it took all of those border edge loops and it made them into a circle. That's one of the reasons why we did the bevel first, right? One, because we did want that bevel on those. But it did give us a lot more edge loops to make a proper circle. If you tried to just circularize a quad opening, right, where that only had 4 edges, it wouldn't really do anything, right? You'd still have a quad. So you needed more edges to make this circularize properly. So radial offset can control the size, and twist can kind of control the twist for it. Of course, if I just hit E for rotate, I could twist it that way. And if I hit R for scale, I could scale it that way also. But that's a neat tool. Edit Mesh, Circularize. And we'll see this once or twice more this semester also. It's a neat tool. Pretty standard feature. A lot of software actually has this nowadays. Not every software, though, but Maya has it. And it's a great way to turn this square, at the top here into something that's more circular to work better for a globe. Because there are going to be times when you want a square or shape to turn into a cylindrical shape seamlessly as one piece, right? So there we've got it circularized. But that's just edit mesh circularize. And now what I want to do is I really just want to extrude up border edges because they're already selected. So I'm going to hit extrude. And in this case, I am weary sometimes of moving along normal direction because it can kind of poof it out, make it grow too large. So I just hit W for regular move and just move it up. Now in this case, you'll notice it's kind of got a couple of little cylindrical ridges and then turns into the globe. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep doing this. F for frame selection so we can focus on that. And I'm just going to hit extrude again. I'm going to hit R for scale, scale it in a little bit. W for move to move it up a little bit. Extrude again. R for scale. Scale it in a bit, right? And generally, if your manipulator gets weirdly oriented or behaves itself really weird, you'll see kind of down here in Modeling Toolkit, there is scale settings. If it's set to object, you should be fine, or world, right? Same thing with the move tool, right? World or object should work fine. We're going to talk about these more later on. You're probably going to be okay with this, but if it's behaving weird, just kind of look down here and see that this is either set to object or world for move, rotate, or scale. But you'll notice what I did is I just extruded and moved it up, and it created this kind of new row here. I extruded, scaled in a bit to make this smaller, right? So this is thinner, and then I moved it up a little bit and gives this kind of nice little angle. And then I extruded again, and I scaled in to make it smaller. And you'll see I've kind of made that first ridge. I can extrude again, hit W for move, move it up, right? I can extrude again, R for scale, scale it in a little bit, right? Then hit W for move to move it up. And you see what it's really doing is it's allowing us to create this quick shape, right? Are there other ways to do this? Yes. In fact, when we do our lamp, we're going to see that. I'm going to show you guys how to use revolves and spline modeling to do this. But it's also really fast and easy to do this just through extruding faces or border edges and just using move and scale. And I wanted you guys to get some good practice at this and see multiple ways to do things, right? So that's probably pretty good for that. We can start to make the spherical part. So I'm going to extrude and then hit W to move up a little bit. I'm going to hit R for scale to scale it out a bit. Kind of make it a little bit bigger because it needs to get wider as it becomes a sphere. And of course, technically you can make a sphere and you can bridge it on. I'd rather you guys get practice with shaping and doing this, right? And you guys might not have, if you use a different one than mine, yours might be more of like a teardrop shape, right? You might have, it doesn't have to be exactly a sphere, but I do want it to be kind of cylindrical at the top, right? So if it's kind of more of like almost like a candle shape, that still has the prerequisites of kind of the cylindrical shape to do circularize. So if you do pick a different bed than this one, it doesn't have to be exactly a globe on top, but it should kind of have this strongly kind of circular cylindrical shape. So that way you can use circularize and extrude border edge to create an interesting shape. So this is really just going to be rinse and repeat, right? I can just keep extruding, hit W for move, and actually, yeah, I think I extruded. There we go. So extrude, hit W, and I'll talk to you guys about what I'm doing when I hit 3 there later on. Don't worry about it today. But you can check to see if maybe there's extra geometry you didn't realize there. 3 is the quick key for that. 1 turns it off. So I'm going to bring that up a little bit. R for scale to scale it out a little bit. Right, because we're trying to create that more spherical shape. Extrude again. W for move to move it up. R for scale to scale it out a bit. Extrude again. W for move. Maybe R to scale in a little bit. Extrude, W for move. R to scale in a little bit. Extrude again, W for move. And you notice I'm just using W for the regular move tool because sometimes the manipulators will get weird. So R for scale. So sometimes it's safer to use just the default manipulators. Well, if I extrude here, you notice how my manipulator's at a weird angle now, right? So you'll notice if I grab the green arrow, it's going to kind of work okay for us, but the blue arrow will push out like that, and the red will start to do weird stuff. So sometimes it really is just safer to just use your regular move tool to move it straight up, and then use scale to scale it in. There we go. Now in this case, if I wanted to, I could reshape these a little more still, right? I could easily double left click on this one, R for scale, scale that back out, double left click, scale that one back out, double left click, right? Remember, double left click selects an edge loop. And my scale tool is already on, so I can just kind of do my quick kind of uniform scales right here to kind of proof those out a little bit. We hit W to move it up a little bit. So you'll notice you can actually just double left click on edge loops to scale and move them at different times. So one of the things to keep in mind as you're doing this modeling is that, I just did Control S to save again, is that you can always come back and modify this later on, right? This edge loop can be moved wherever weird way you want to, right? This stuff's all editable later on. So I'm gonna go back up here to double left click on this border edge. I'm gonna finish this up, we'll extrude, R for scale in, W for move up, and then we'll do one more little extrusion. That will move up a little bit. And what I want to do is I want to actually turn this, I want to merge this border edge loop into a single vertex at the top here. And that is most easily done with Edit Mesh, Merge to Center. We'll talk more about these merge tools as we go on as well, but Edit Mesh, Merge to Center will take all of these border edges and it will weld them, merge them into a single vertex at the very tip top. And we now have our globe shape on here. Now, if I go and hold down right mouse button object mode and I click off, you'll notice it's got this kind of weird faceted shading here, right? We kind of saw that on the knob for the end table, right? What's happening is that the normals, right, which are the direction the polygons are facing out, when a polygon's next to another polygon, if the smoothing angle is too low, it shades them independent of each other, right? Whereas if you tell the angle that the faces meet at this edge to be higher, it'll kind of try to smooth shade over all of these, kind of collectively shade so they work together. So just to show that off again, I'll click back on this. And in the Mesh Display menu, there is Soften Edge. We saw that the other day. Harden Edge sets all of the smoothing angle to 0. So if I harden edge, you notice how everything becomes faceted? So if I click back on that and I go back to Mesh Display and I soften edge, it smooth shades everything, right? It's the same polygons. It doesn't change their shape at all, but it does kind of collectively shade. It kind of blends the normals to work together instead of separately. Can you control that at a specific angle? Yeah, the Soften Harden Edges options box one, you can actually control the angle. So that now gives us kind of a nice little kind of bedpost. And it was cool because it's most of the tools we know, right? We've done some beveling already. We've done some extruding before. We're getting more practice with move and scale, but we did add in circularize, right? And we did see some of the Mesh Display Soften Edge again, just like we did last time. Now what I want to do is I want to mirror these over, right? Because I've got one bedpost made. So we're going to go make sure we're in object mode, right? Hold down right mouse button, object mode, select the bedpost, so it's a green wireframe. And we're going to go to mesh. And we're going to go to the mirror options box for mesh, right? Mirror in the mesh menu, right? Options box. And in this case, it's already set up from last time, right? We should have cut geometry off. It shouldn't be too much of a problem on these ones because they're pretty far apart, but I've never been a big fan of the way that works. I find it's sometimes causes more problems than it solves, so just turn it off for now. In this case, I want to mirror over to this side, right? So I want to mirror this bedpost over to there. And if we look, that's the red axis or the x-axis. So we pick x. Combining with original is fine, so it makes them one object. So I'll mirror. We can hit Q to turn that off, and you'll notice that they're one object. Awesome. Now in this case, I want to mirror these back, right? And because we were building on the 0, and you notice how when I scaled uniformly out there, you'll notice that because I scaled this out and didn't move it, that this bed is still symmetrical this direction and this direction. And that's usually good if you can do that. It'll help you with stuff. So I'm going to click on the bedpost again. Remember, just left click to select it. I'm going to go back to Mesh, Mirror, Options box, and I'm going to pick Z-axis because we're mirroring it this way, right? And that's the Z, the blue. Combined with original is fine. And usually copies on and world's on, and it's using offset 0. So it's mirroring based on the world coordinates based on the 0 of the world. So we'll mirror it, and there we go. Now technically you could actually play with the offset, right? So if you really didn't have that built symmetrically, you could always play with the offset a little bit. But in this case, we're good. And they're all one object. Now, at this point, you're going to notice something. The bedposts are identical, right? But these ones are taller. How do we solve that? Well, we really don't want to actually change. You notice my knobs are probably a little small compared to the picture. Guys, I want you to match the pictures as close as possible. I'm the teacher. I'm showing you the concept, right? So I don't have to worry about that so much. I've shown you the tool and the technique. What we need to do is we need these to be taller. Now we could always separate them out, but I don't think we're ready for that quite yet, and it's a lot easier to do it the way I'm about to show it to you. So what I can do is I can go to face selection mode if I wanted to. Hold down right mouse button, faces, and I can select all those faces in that bedpost. Right? So just left click drag to select all those in that bedpost. Although technically I could left click drag to select both bedposts. And I can hit R for scale. Now I'm eventually going to show you guys how to edit pivot and readjust the pivot position, but we don't need to show that now. But just to show this, if I scale, two problems come up. One, the bottoms are no longer the same position. And you see how it's stretching the top? So initially you think scale would be the best option to make this longer, but it's not really going to be. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually go, not even to face mode. I'm going to hold down right mouse button over the object, right? So I put my cursor over the object, hold down right mouse button. I'm going to go to vertex selection mode, right? Vertex. And you see how it shows all those kind of magenta, purplish, kind of pinkish color. It's kind of more like a magenta. Vertices. And I'm just going to left click drag just those top vertices. Just the top vertices for that whole thing. I'm going to turn my move tool on instead of scale. Because here's the thing. By not scaling these guys, they'll keep the exact same size and shape they already have. By not having these vertices selected down here, they won't move. So believe it or not, you can change size just by moving parts of a model. So I can grab that green arrow and move these up. And you'll notice the bottom doesn't move because those vertices aren't selected. And since I'm not scaling, these stay exactly the same shape they were before. We've just lengthened this section right here. So believe it or not, since these bedposts are identical and they're just longer, make one, mirror it over, and then you could always go back in and just select the vertices, right? Hold down right mouse button, the vertices of these guys, and you can move them wherever you want to adjust your shape. So this helps us to understand how far you can push shaping just by selecting certain sections of your model. And that you can change size not always just by scaling, but just by moving certain sections of your model. All right, that's a great place to stop with the bedposts for today and actually be done with our lectures for this class session.